Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fialka. Today is May 18, 2025. I want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. It's an honor and a pleasure today to be here with Mark Fell. Where are you calling in from, Mark?
Hi, Jerry. I'm in Cologne. So I've got a show tomorrow. So yeah, a hotel room in the middle of Cologne. Mid mini tour.
How cool is that? The first question, Mark, is what is the best thing for a human being?
I mean, the thing is, there's not just one thing. There's like there's a whole bunch of things, and none of them make sense without the other things. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I'd say the best, and also it's difficult to respond on the behalf of the whole of humanity.
Yeah.
But the things that are important to me, I would say, like a reduction of suffering.
That's good. I don't get that one very often. Reduction of suffering.
Minimizing suffering. But actually, suffering is always present, I think, in life.
Yeah.
So I think the next thing is finding a way to. Actually, if I say the next thing, I'm in some kind of religious building right now. This hotel, I think, is some part of some kind of religious convention center, and there's a Bible in the corner. And I was going to say something like the ability to turn one's suffering into empathy is probably quite an important thing for humans.
That's really good, Mark. All these questions it can expand on, that's a good start because it really touches on a lot of where we're going. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Whoa. The favorite form of information is, I mean, how abstract do you want me to get? Because what I was going to say is my favorite form of assimilating information is to sit on top of a hillside or peak, drinking tea.
Yeah.
Looking into the distance. But I don't know if that's a form of information that I'm assimilating.
No, I would say that's a really good. See, you put the questions in the context you want. And that's, Ginsburg says first thought, best thought. You don't have to over explain it or put it into context. Some of these early questions, is it more this or more that? Well, I know it's both and it depends, but I'm for your percept over your concept. That your perception is sitting on a hillside drinking tea. That is a great form of information.
Yeah.
I like that.
But yeah, I go out into the hills a lot. Like I live in Sheffield, and between Sheffield and Manchester is a national park called the Peak District. So a lot of the time I'm in the Peak District on the top of not quite a mountain, just assimilating the environment.
Yeah. Well, that's, Pascal said the world's problems could be solved if we could sit quietly in a room in solitude. So, I mean, that's part of it. So why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Well, I think humans do lots of things, and we could understand what humans do in terms of the collection of and gathering of information. I would say the belief that humans collect and gather information, that description is a kind of culturally specific one.
Yeah.
That belongs to a tradition that favors the mind and meaning and reason. So First of all, I'd say I would say that's I would not object to the question, but I'd say it's it's kind of a very culturally loaded question. So, but I'm going to go with it. So why do people collect and gather information? I mean, what is you mean in terms of like collecting books or collecting music or?
Yeah, I'll respond, Mark, because this is really good. It really is me and you versus the wording on the questions. We're sort of psychoanalyzing the wording on the questions. So I'm all for you saying, well, let me shift that noun or that verb to this in order to answer that question. You did that well. You said, well, your question's loaded with cultural specifics. Exactly, because when I say information, people think, oh, you mean I get the news from the newspaper or from, they don't know. One guy, one of my favorite answers ever is, what's your favorite form of information? And the guy goes, human touch. Now, now people don't think, and a woman said a hug. People don't think that's information because of the words. So the words we're using that I propose are up for your grabs to interpret as you will. So that's fine. And I mean, the bottom line is most people go, why do we collect information? For survival. I mean, that's it. And I know that. I mean, that's good. I'm trying to get a little deeper into what people really think. So whatever you say is fine. And one other thing, I'm open for tangents, anecdotes, stories. And here's the big one. You don't have to answer the question. People but I'm just saying it's more wide open. I'm just giving out prompts to you to go wherever.
Like what I would, so I totally get where you're coming from. So the person that said the best way to get information is through a hug or physical touch. Yes, there is an information exchange there.
Yeah.
But what I would say, rather than stretch the limits of what it means to exchange information, let's not place the exchange of information as if it is essentially what it is to be human, is to exchange information. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So human touch is incredibly important.
Yeah.
But for me, it's not important because I feel like I'm exchanging information with someone.
Yeah.
It's important because it's human touch, and it grounds you and it makes you feel secure, and there's serotonin and all this kind of stuff. So I'd say, the person that said exchanging information via human touch is important, I'd agree that human touch is really important, but not because it's the exchange of information.
Yeah.
So to get back to the question, which is why do we gather information? I'm going to talk about I will, rather than expand the limits of what it means to talk about information, I'm going to use a conservative interpretation of information. And I'd say probably people hoard information. It's a kind of neurosis, I think, to hoard things. And the hoarding of information, the gathering of information, probably comes from a place of anxiety.
Yeah,
I would say.
Yeah. No, that's really good. This woman won this film festival, and I'm interviewing her, and she goes, "You got too much information in your head." It's like I'm always babbling off, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, that really taught me to go and say, well, I'm trying to cipher out what information I want to learn from and push aside maybe the frivolous stuff, but maybe the frivolous stuff will help me too. So that's good. Now, this is even more stupid, Mark. Is information more, is gathering or collecting information more innate? Or no, here's how I word it. Is the need to collect or gather information more innate or more invented?
So, I would say again, according to a worldview that stresses the gathering and collecting and hoarding of information as a human characteristic,
Yeah.
Whether it's innate or invented, I don't think that dualism really applies, because
Yeah.
everything is a combination of both.
Yeah.
So, when you're talking about why is it that people behave a certain way? Is it a nature or a nurture kind of thing?
Yeah.
It never is one or the other. It's
Yeah.
everyone is a complex equation, and it's always a balance between things that we call nature and things that we call nurture. So
Yeah.
yeah, for me, it's not about whether it's innate or
Yeah.
whatever. It's about the relationship of factors that make it what it is.
Yeah. Really good, Mark, because that is it's that the false dichotomy things. Is it, I go, is it more this or more that? And this woman goes, the word more doesn't function in your question. Because I'm trying to get you to go, is it a little more nature or a little more nurture? And of course it's both, and it depends, and there's so many factors. Really good. So do thoughts create emotions?
You broke up a little bit then. What did you say? Sorry.
Do thoughts create emotions?
I mean, there are lots of different. Historically, there's lots of different writings on this subject that will give you different answers. I would struggle to answer that question because I don't really understand what thoughts and emotions are anymore.
Yeah.
So,
No, that's good, because we invented the words thinking and feeling. So we think we can separate them, and we know it's the same. But here's the next one, Mark. Fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I.
wow, I don't know what I think until. So I don't know what I think until I've had a cup of tea.
Yeah,
Is
I get that.
probably like a really meaningful answer for me to give to that question.
It's it's great. See, McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it. You're
Mhm.
putting in the context of what the environment is you're doing. Great.
Mhm.
Can humans think without language?
I think thinking takes many forms. Linguistic thought, for example, speaking and writing are two very different sorts of ways of thinking. We could say that, like, making music is a way of thinking.
Yeah.
We could say, let me give you an example. My dad's. I'm from a kind of working class background, so my dad was a steel worker all his life. He worked in a factory, and he worked at a lathe in a department. It was called a test house, so they'd make prototypes and things. But it was just every day he was working with steel and machines that enabled him to work with steel. And as a young kid, like, probably 13, 14, I realized that for my dad, this was a very profound way of thinking.
Yes.
And hence it was a way of understanding and articulating and resolving his experience of the world. So if you want to say there's a vocabulary or a language embedded in that act of working with physical materials, then we could say, yeah, you might need a language. But what I would say in that case is that my dad was thinking with his machines. It seemed obvious to me.
Yeah.
Whether we want to say there was a language around that, we might or might not want to do that. You know, for me, it's not necessarily to say, okay, so there has to be a language implicit in that physical activity.
Yeah.
I would say thinking takes many forms. I mean, I've changed my position. You know, as a young kid, I was like, I would be like, you definitely need to have a language in order to have a thought. Da, da, da. But you know, now I'm a kind of middle-aged guy. It's like I've got a bit sort of mystical, and now I'm kind of like, yeah, thought takes many forms, and I would say that we don't need a language of the, you know, the kind of thing that that most people would call a language. You know,
Language.
we don't need that in order to engage with, navigate, understand our environment.
Yeah. Really good. Of what kind of famous writer was on the radio, and she goes, I grew up in the Caribbean, and my mother never read a book, and she knew what to do when a tsunami hit from a song that they sang in their culture. So that's really what you said in bringing them in. Your dad was good. And Chomsky says a language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. Mark, what do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
It depends on the context. Like if I'm in a difficult meeting with someone, then I persevere and try to make the best of it. But then when I'm trying to make sense of a complex experience, then I understand that language these days, I feel like there are things that that are not adequately, that can't be adequately said in a language.
Yeah.
For example, if I tried to describe what it really feels like to make art, I can talk about it in lots of ways, but I've never been able to find a satisfactory way of explaining it.
Yeah.
So you could say, okay, language, maybe not that language is broken down in that at that point, but it's certainly not going to where I want it to get me to.
Yeah.
So in that case, I just like, yeah, well, it's not working. This way of trying to analyze this experience is not working. I'm not going to be able to come up with the explanation that I wanted to come up with. And so I just have to make the best of it.
Yeah. I like that. That's a good positive attitude. They asked Robert Frost, the poet, could you explain this poem? And he says, you mean you want me to say it worse?
That's a brilliant answer.
That is so cool. Okay, these are two questions from Alan Turing in the 50s. One, is thinking a function of the soul?
So bearing in mind it's from Turing, what he's asking is there something specific about being human that enables one to have consciousness?
Yeah.
And can machines be conscious? I think is what he's asking behind that question. And my answer to that is I have no clue. I think artificial intelligence, the term artificial intelligence is very misleading. I think we could also call it just like automated problem solving.
Yeah.
For example, because the word intelligence implies to a lot of people, not to experts, but to a lot of people, intelligence gets mixed up with ideas of consciousness and being sentient and feeling things. And whether or not AI can have those qualities, I don't know. I think AI is a very dangerous technology in the hands of the wrong people. So I think AI could transform the world into a much better place if it wasn't being wielded by people who just want to make money.
Yeah.
So for me, the technology is not a problem. It's technology within a capitalist framework.
Yeah.
Like, who owns it and why are they using it and what are they getting from it?
Yeah.
So yeah, in answer to Turing, I think there is something specific about being human that you know, we aren't machines. We're made of different stuff. You know, it's quite easy to describe human thought and consciousness and behavior the way you might describe a computer, you know, short-term memory, inputs, outputs and stuff. I think it's a mistake to kind of reduce, to do that reductive description of what it is to be human. So I would say, what was his question? Is it
Can thinking or it no is thinking a function of the soul?
So I'm going to be controversial and say yes, because I think consciousness, and that's controversial because I don't really believe in a soul.
That is so.
But thinking about this in a kind of trying to be complex about this and not reductive.
Yeah.
Thinking the way humans think requires a thing that could be called a soul.
Yeah. Mark, you know, I ask these questions because I want the person to answer the way I think to reinforce my thinking. Like Duchamp says, I'm going to contradict myself so I don't conform to my own ideas. I don't want to conform to my own ideas, but I like it when my guest says, oh, the same thing I kind of think. But I don't say you're wrong, because most people, and it wasn't controversial. In your sense, you go, I'm going to be controversial. It was reaffirming to me. But most people go, well, it depends on what you mean by the soul. It's like, come on, give me a break. We kind of know, have a collective hunch what the soul is, but they want to shift it. And it's like they go, well, it depends on what you mean by thinking. But you know, in what you're doing is, I want to tell you that I appreciate you taking the time to think about these questions. And there's no rush. And so you're listening well because you're articulate and concise and smart. And I appreciate this. But McLuhan's main thing was, I'm after new questions and new metaphors. I know that, you know, we can study them old. And I want to say, what's a new question rather than what is the answer? And that's what you're doing, sort of. But you have ESP, because I said there's two Turing questions. And the second Turing question is, can machines think? So before I even asked the second one, you were answering it in the first one. So talk about mystical in your old age. You're also got ESP, dude.
Wow.
But I mean, you already answered it, but you want to add anything else? Can machines think?
I mean, thinking in terms of what it feels like when humans think, you know, it's bound up into conscious awareness sometimes. Yeah. So that that specific kind of conscious thinking, can machines do that? I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, like, actually, I think the scientific community, the cognitive science community, the contemporary philosophy community, a whole bunch of people are all getting increasingly concerned with, I mean, philosophy has always been concerned with what is consciousness.
Yeah.
And a lot of people from the scientific community thought they'd got it all sewn up, that it was like an emergent property of like neural activity and stuff. But it seems to me a lot of people who are on the kind of weird edges of these different disciplines are all starting to say, we don't really know about consciousness, and maybe we need to reconsider how we think about what consciousness is. And so I'm in, I am less and less sure about lots and lots of things. I mean, I'm very certain about many things, you know. I'm like, the things that I'm certain about are ethics, about trying to treat people with respect, trying to make the world, to reduce suffering, for example. So the things I'm certain about are the ethical things. The big, the overarching descriptions of the nature of the universe and stuff, I don't have a clue about those things. I'm really happy to listen to experts and be amazed by possibilities, but I don't know. I don't pretend to have even a basic understanding of those sorts of questions.
But Mark, this is good, because Rebecca Solnit says it well. She goes, just because you ask the question doesn't mean I have to answer it. And I feel that way. I welcome people saying, I don't know, or I can't answer that. I'm not trying to trick you and put you on the spot.
Yeah, I understand that.
But that one person said, well, AI's in its early stages and it's our job to raise it well. So who knows? I mean, here's the next question, and you tackled this really early on. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I think in terms of the pursuit of happiness or meaning, it's what I pursue is a commitment to trying to trying to live an ethical life. So I'm not, for me, happiness isn't about finding meaning, or happiness in the world isn't about an inward journey, isn't about fixing me. You know what I mean? It isn't about like, let's like do some psychoanalysis and or some like read some self-help books. Maybe I can do Pilates this weekend and some yoga. You know, happiness and meaning for me are not to be found by looking at myself. Happiness and meaning for me take second place to like, what can I do to help others? And you know, we live in difficult times. You know, we live in increasing inequality, you know, bad stuff happening in the world. And I live in a town where there's a lot of people are struggling to have any sort of decent life. I'm lucky because, you know, I've got a stable life, I've got a stable income, I live a comfortable life. So those kinds of questions about happiness and meaning and which do I choose, my answer is a commitment to the people that I live around.
No, that's highly commendable. I appreciate that, because just a side joke is the guy goes into the bookstore and says, where's the self-help books? And the clerk says, wouldn't that defeat the whole purpose? Because, you know, I got the question from Viktor Frankl. He has a book called The Man's Search for Meaning. And he says happiness tends to not last, meaning tends to last. How would you respond to that?
Well, I don't think it thinking about my own events in my family, like my sister died when she was quite young, and my mum never really overcame the death of my
Yeah.
younger sister. So, you know, she was kind of, she never overcame that grief, basically.
Yeah.
So there was a deep sadness that I could see in her face. Do you know what I mean? Whenever I looked at her,
Yeah.
I could see there was the sense of loss and grief was there the whole time. And yet she was the happiest and warmest person. One of the happiest and warmest people that I had ever met.
Wow.
And at her funeral, I wrote some words, and I felt like I managed to sum it up. That the happiness that she showed, it wasn't a mask, you know what I mean, to kind of to hide the grief.
Yeah.
It was an act of transforming that inner pain into social good. And that for me is what happiness is. It's not about erasing pain. It's about the ability to see, I'm struggling. This is where the words are breaking down for me. It's about the ability to transform that through your relationships and just being nice to people.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean? And this is what my mum did. And so happiness isn't this state of like, you know, there's no pain anywhere in the map of who you are. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But happiness is like, it's about taking a stand on, I think it's a product of taking a stand on how you live life.
Yeah. It's beautiful. Really, really inspired by what your mom, how you described how your mom transformed it into social good. Really well done. You kind of touched on this one, Mark. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like is is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
Well, these days, you know, I'd go the mystical route. I'd say like what if consciousness was something that was outside of us?
Yeah.
That we connected with? What if we see the world as a thought experiment? What happens if we see the world like that? That consciousness isn't a product of our neurological activity, that, you know, and that's probably what most scientists would say it is. What about if we see it, and I'm not saying it is the case, but what about if we think about consciousness in that way, that it's about joining with something that's beyond ourselves?
Yeah.
And so I don't know the answer to your question, but I'd say let's try and consider because we don't know. I think even scientists would say they don't know the answer.
Yeah.
We're in the world of just like metaphors and which one feels the best. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, what feels the best? Does it feel the best to say consciousness is a product of some stuff fizzing in my brain? Or does it feel the best to say consciousness is what happens when I somehow connect with something outside myself?
Yeah.
These days, the second answer, the second metaphor is kind of feeling quite appealing to me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's really good because of course it's both. We're detecting and creating it. But what you're doing, Mark, is what I'm after is let me answer that by asking a new question. That's like the Irish. They go, you guys answer questions with questions, and they go, we do, eh?
Well, I'm Irish heritage, so that's probably where I get it from.
That's it. Or John Cage. I know you're in the music world. John Cage said that's a very good question. I wouldn't want to ruin it with an answer.
Nice.
But he would talk about it, and that's what it is. It's spurring on more, thinking. So what's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
I wouldn't. I've not thought about this before. So a really boring answer would be that they are in completely different domains.
Yeah. No, that's not boring. I get that.
Yeah, but it is kind of like, oh, come on, let's think of something a bit more interesting than that. I was watching a YouTube video about so any scientist watching this is going to say, Mark, you've completely misunderstood what this person in this YouTube video was trying to tell you. But it was something like, imagine a photon moving across the universe at the speed of light. Because of the thing of like, the faster you move, the slower time elapses.
Yeah.
The photon leaves its destination, and 2 billion years later, after traveling at the speed of light, it arrives somewhere else. To the photon, it's the same instant.
Yeah.
So scientists watching, if I've misunderstood, I'm and I think if that photon was conscious, like what does that mean for the speed of its thoughts?
Yeah.
Because the speed of its thought is related to the speed of its travel.
Yeah.
So so the question, what's the fastest light or thought, it puts my head in a weird place. and that kind of that's what came out. So I don't know what I think. Speed is probably difficult to. Does it even make sense when we talk about thought? And also speed implies a kind of particular view of time, and I think a linear view of time is actually a product of thought rather than a feature of the universe.
Yeah.
So, but if it was an exam question and I could either tick box A or box B, which is fastest, light or thought, I will say that thought is the slower one.
Is the slower? Wow.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay. But if I was back at school and that was the exam question and they're like, come on, you've got to put one on the paper, I'd just be like, I'm going to guess that.
Yeah. 80% of people say speed of light. But I also think how you sussed it out was beautiful, because humans thought up the speed of light. We made that up. So it could be that. It's sort of, you touched on what's called metacognition, thinking about thinking. But just talking about speed, I have to tell you, one of my favorites is Frank Zappa did an anti-drug commercial once, and it says, "Don't do speed; it will turn you into your parents."
Yeah, that's a really good way of not getting kids to take drugs.
So Audre Lorde, the poet, said, "You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools." Her colleague Yvonne Rainer said, "Oh, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?"
That's a tricky one. I'm kind of quite interested in tools. There's a quote by Richard Rorty. Oh God, what is it? Something like, when a new vocabulary emerges, it can imagine its own purpose or something.
Yeah, that's
and I
good.
think the same applies. It isn't that. It was. I mean, I'm misquoting him, but it's something like that. Like when a new vocabulary, the function of a thing doesn't come before the thing, sort
Yeah.
of. Like the thing comes into existence and then it finds its own function. And I think it seems to me it feels like tools are like that to me. You know, often people think of tools as like, yeah, they get designed and then they have this function, but I think the function of a tool is continually shifting according to its context. And like, for example, you know, when you have a tin of paint, there's no tool designed specifically to lift the lid off a tin of paint. You know, I mean, probably a pry bar would, but most people use screwdrivers, don't they?
Yeah.
So I think in terms of dismantling your master's house and what new tool would do that? Well, actually, I just think critical thinking is probably, it's a very old tool. And I think critical thinking is something that we ought to be teaching a lot more of in schools.
It's really well done, because I didn't want to imply it had to be a tangible tool. And I also say, you don't have, I open some of my questions with cute quotes. So what I'm basically asking is, what tool do you most gravitate towards? If you want to add the word new, fine. If you want to add the word dismantling the master's house, fine. But I wanted to go back, Mark, for a second. I miss it. And I love what you said. Critical thinking is the tool that we all should be nurturing and engaging in. And or one of them, one of the most important. But the Richard Rorty quote, I really want to look that up. When the new vocabulary emerges, it can, and what were you saying after that? I missed that. Just
it formulates its own purpose or something.
Yeah.
I think
its own purpose.
Was from in the early 90s. There were 3 books of collected essays, and I think it was in the first one.
Yeah.
Do you want me to try and find it?
Oh, no, not now. We can find it later. But it's really, it's really close to what I study in McLuhan world, which goes almost quantum. It effects precede causes. It's also Mark Twain saying, when you have a hammer in your hand, everything looks like a nail, you know. So it is. I mean, we invented spoken word. That's a tool. People don't realize it. They don't know what it's done to us. We just embrace all our tools, you know. I mean, I'm going through that right now. In my city, Venice, Waymos have taken over. These are driverless cars. They're using our city to do research and development. And everybody's like, oh my God, this is horrible. And you look and there's nobody in this car and it's zooming down and there's 4 of them now. Now they're like everywhere. And you know, then one friend's got in one and it stopped and he couldn't get out. He was locked in. Wow. And it was like, oh my God, but you're locked in an airplane. So I said, well, if you're using our town to research and develop your new product, you should be giving homeless people and elders a ride to the hospital free. But whatever, that's just, again, how do you make the world a better place? Your emphasis on ethics. But then you watch CBS Sunday Morning last week, and they did 6 minutes on them. Bottom line, they're way safer than your friend. So I don't drive. I get my friend to drive me somewhere. It's safer for me to hire a Waymo than that. And I know which friends drive safely. But bottom lines, there's 26 cameras on this sucker. A human being doesn't have 26, whatever. So that's like, what is the bottom line on that invention? The new invention, it's formulating its own purpose. It's shifting my thinking. I don't like cars. I don't want to be in a car, but I'm on a bicycle and they're way more dangerous. So then how do I shift? How does it, the bottom line, sorry to go on a rant, but the bottom line is, how do our inventions influence our behavior? How do they shape our behavior? So the next question is right after that, because people say, well, tool, yours was critical thinking. What new toy do you suggest? Or what toy do you gravitate towards? Because everybody would go, well, what do you mean tool? How about a toy? So then I've just added the bumper question. Well, tell me a toy you suggest.
Well, the toy would be curiosity.
Oh, there you go. Very good.
So that's So yeah. I guess that's the thing that, yeah,
that's good. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Checkout times, hotel checkout times.
Checkout times. Now
that's a late check. Like, I hate checking out of hotels early, and I'm in a place now, and it's like I've got to check out not tomorrow, but the day after at 11 a.m.
Yeah.
But my flight isn't till like mid-afternoon.
Yeah.
So it's like I've got like 3 hours of like, what do I do? Just sit in the lobby or walk around this? So it does. I mean, that's a flippant answer, but
no, it's a real. I love it. I want it just to be bare bones honest. So here we go, Mark. McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists, musicians, are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, so we might learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So, Mark, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Well, I don't know if it's something that, so technology has a kind of a hidden psychic impact, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I'd say that I'd say it's not just artists that kind of
broadcast them. Yeah.
Broadcast that. I think we all assimilate and display and replay the psychological impact of, for example, if you think about social media and the way social media is designed, social media potentially could be an amazingly transformative thing, but it's basically designed to make people angry in order to keep them using the device. It's like anger is more engaging. So I think it breeds it instills kind of anxiety and division and screws people up. I think social media has a lot of toxic effects, and you can see those daily. I think, in everyone.
Yeah.
And
but Mark, that's like when we invented spoken word. It breeds anxiety. You're saying this breeds anxiety more. All our inventions have services and disservices, sort of, in the big picture. But some of them now, because really social media began, according to historians, with electricity. When we started communicating with the telegraph, that's the beginning of social media.
I mean,
so,
we could mark that as the starting point, yeah. But
I'm just saying, I understand what you're saying, but both of me and you got in touch through social media, which is email. But maybe me and you don't do Facebook or TikTok or Instagram or the million other ways. But there is an amazing amount of YouTube videos of you where I could hear your music, hear you talk about your music, and those were services. But I didn't have to go that much of a deep dive and go, I'm going to spend 10 hours researching this guy. So it did, like, well, maybe I didn't research it enough. So it does have toxic, but and I would say, going back to your dad probably didn't ignore the hidden social effects of his job and his upbringing. So it does sound elitist how I say it. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects? It's really, some people go, well, I don't ignore them. Well, you're an artist. You have maybe a heightened sensibility. But I'm saying, why do some people ignore the hidden psychic effects of, more specifically, artists? I understand that your dad was doing it, or your dad treated his job as an art form, probably. So he was. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I think the question for me is like, why do some people feel uncomfortable in the world?
Yeah, that is the question in it.
Yeah, and why do they kind of acknowledge that and demonstrate that and not try to hide it? So when I was a kid, like say early 1980s, and living through difficult times, like it was the Thatcher government in Britain.
Yeah.
The kind of industrial, I lived in an industrial part of Britain, and everyone was losing jobs, and it seemed to me that the kind of the social, the fabric of society was just being ripped apart.
Yeah.
And I just felt like I didn't fit. I had friends at school, but it was like I didn't really feel like I fitted with them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I felt like some weirdo outsider.
Yeah.
And discovered philosophy and art and music and film and literature and politics and stuff. And that kind of became my life. And I meet people now who are of my generation who clearly are feeling that kind of anxiety and that sense of not belonging in the lives that they're living, but yet they've not kind of stepped out of it and to develop their own kind of way of living. Do you know what I mean? It's like they've had a day job.
Mark, is the word coping, because I use the word coping.
Yeah.
That's what Pound was teaching McLuhan, that we look to the artist to learn how to cope with the hidden psychic effects. My wife hates that word cope. It makes it sound like the psychic effects are bad, but they're just there. And it's like your mom transforming it into social good. Did it permeate her life and she was underneath anxiety ridden all the time? Doesn't sound like it. But you know, it was there present, but she wasn't like, so her coping mechanism, it seemed, was to not ignore it, that it
Yeah,
was. So yeah, the question is why, like, your fellow friends ignore it? Because that's the question. Why do they ignore it?
it's like, why do, I mean, this is going to sound elitist, so people are welcome to pull me up about that, but like, you know, I kind of, since being 12, 13, I've always just felt like some kind of weirdo on the edge of society. And I don't really care. But why do some people care? Why are some people bothered? Why do people want the normal stuff? Do you know what I mean? That's what I don't understand.
But Mark, you're doing exactly what I'm most after in the 40 years interviewing people, is you're rewording the question for me. So you're when I ask this ignore question, this is what I got. I should say, why do some people feel uncomfortable in the world? And why do some people feel that weirdos are different? You know, that in essence, what, you know, why do artists feel weird? I mean, I have a question I never ask anymore, is why are most artists liberal? Because they're more thinking. Like, maybe some of the guys in your dad's shop were that. We're normal. We go to work, we go and live with our family, and that, and we bear through it, you know.
Yeah, but you know, they're all really nice guys and intelligent, and you know, it's not a value judgment. It's just like,
right.
Why do some people just like flip out of that, and others people just like stay with it, and like that whole living a normal life.
Yeah.
I just don't know what the appeal is of, like,
That's,
you know, I have a day job and go on holiday 2 times a year, and if I'm lucky, we get a new car or a new tele. You know, it's like, and we spend our money in the shopping center on, like, products we don't need. And
well, I would say, Mark, is why are there weirdos is because they're critical thinkers. Because that's it. You're thinking a little deeper, going, because they might think, dude, you worrying about your checkout time in a hotel is you know, is anxiety ridden. They're like, I don't need that in my life. So it basically, it's putting into the context, you know. But I do think artists are very important. But most people, I mean, not most, but a lot of people think art is bullshit. Like, you got $1 million for taping a banana on a fucking wall with duct tape.
yeah, I mean, the art world is a toxic world.
It is. But again, you found, to me, what I get from talking with you, Mark, is that you found that the lead into the next question is that you're trying to operate ethically in the world and make the world a better place. And you know, music or art can heal or do what all these other things, but do artists have moral obligations?
Well, everyone has a moral obligation, I think. You know, everyone has a moral obligation, whether you're an artist or a pizza delivery guy or both, because a lot of them are both. You know, everyone's has an obligation.
Yeah,
I think. But then that's a difference between, is there an obligation for the artwork to have a clearly moral or political agenda or point to make? And I would say that isn't the case.
that is not. Yeah. That's
so
hard.
I think and you know, some great art does have a very clear political agenda and point to make. For example, Picasso's Guernica is you know, has a political
Message.
Context.
Yeah, because you know, here's the great story on Guernica, Mark. Picasso's finishing the painting in his studio in Paris, and a German government official's touring the art studios of Paris. And he walks in and he looks at the painting and he goes to Picasso, "Did you do that?" And Picasso goes, "No, you did." So are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
I am not afraid
Yeah.
of ideas. I don't live in fear.
Yeah. Can you?
Um,
Yeah. That's good. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
trying to think. I remember, so I was 4 years old when my sister was born. So my mum was obviously in hospital giving birth to my sister. So I'll have been 4. And so we had like some carer came around to look after me and my older brother. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
whatever it was. Like, I think we called them home help, but the home help would be what
Yeah.
we called them back then. And I have a very distinct memory of eating porridge, a bowl of porridge that the person put in front of me, and I didn't want to eat it. And I remember getting, a Lego brick
Yeah.
and putting the Lego brick in the porridge and just watching it sink. And later, I realized it was like an early act of resistance. So that was an early memory.
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
I'd say it's not a curse.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if do you ever watch the TV series Black Mirror?
Have not seen it. Tell me. Yeah. How's it
It's like
related?
it's like a kind of newish science fiction series
Yeah.
on Netflix, and there's one of them where the basic premise is that there's like someone at school, a young woman who's been treated badly by her friendship group, and as an adult, she has the ability to like move between parallel strands of reality.
Yeah.
So she can, and she uses this to get revenge on all the people that were horrible to her at school.
Yeah.
And if I'd have been directing that film, what I would have done is I would have confronted this protagonist, this person who's exacting revenge on all of these friendship group, and say, look, because you can travel through, you can weave together whatever strand of reality you want. Why don't you just travel back in time and live the version of reality where you weren't excluded by your friendship group? Do you know what I mean? Thus
Yeah.
resolving your psychological torment.
Yeah.
And if I was writing that script and one of the characters has said to this central protagonist, look, just go back in time, live the nice version, and everything will be all right, I would have had the protagonist say something like how she felt like she wanted to hang on to the hatred and the anger.
Yeah.
She wanted to hang on to the damage. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's what we do.
Yeah.
I think we actually get some weird masochistic thing out of dwelling on bad things in our histories. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, because that's Carl Jungish, where you integrate your shadow light, the shadow, you integrate it. So it's sort of like back to your mom, transforming it. You can, but in that ideal situation, it's like, well, why would you want to? Why don't you celebrate the good? Really good. I love that. So tell me someone within your immediate family who had an impact on you, and what was that impact specifically?
Well, all of them, all my family. So I guess the most important, I mean, of equal importance is both my parents. So my mum, as I've said, both my parents were from very poor backgrounds. So
Yeah.
mum was from a kind of mining community in the north of England. She was from a small village, but she was really intellectually switched on, basically. So she back in those days, she was born in like 33. So we're talking, probably like early 40s, early 1940s. She won a scholarship to go to a grammar school. So grammar schools were for kind of people who could afford to pay for an elite education. So
Yeah.
she basically, as a young child, like probably, I don't know what age it would have been, like 9 or 10 years old, got taken out of this quite difficult social context and put through this elite education.
Yeah.
So she was really well educated. So as I was growing up, I was aware that my mum was quite different to all my friends' mums. She spoke in quite a posh voice. I mean, she could speak in quite a posh, well-spoken voice, not a broad Yorkshire accent. There's a lot of accent prejudice in Britain, by the way.
Right.
Anyway, my mum was able to like speak. She was able to reason. She was able to. She taught me how to discuss, I think, is what she did. She taught me how to debate and consider issues. And she was an avid reader, so she just the always reading books. She would just read, go through novels every 2 days. So although we didn't live in abject poverty, we were from a kind of working class family. We didn't have a luxurious lifestyle. But one of the things she taught me was the value of literature. So we were always at the local library, which was like a little cabin next to the shops. So each week we'd be choosing books to read that week. So she taught me that, basically, and she supported me. She supported my weirdness. I was quite a weird oppositional kid.
What'd you mainly get from your dad, Mark?
So dad was, my dad's still alive. He's like 93 now. And he was from a poor steelworking community in the East End of Sheffield. Really, really urban poor, really not a nice place to live in many respects. And he won a scholarship to attend Ruskin College, which was like a really big deal. So that was the equivalent of going to university. But he couldn't go because his mum died. So he had to go to the factory to provide for his siblings. And so my dad was, is quite an annoying person, actually. But he lived his life in a steel factory, but he was a craftsperson. He was he just loved making things. And he would work with all kinds of materials. So he had a real sensitivity, I think, about materials and he never really had an opinion about anything. Do you know what I mean? It was one of those people who just like, oh yeah, whatever, like, and yeah, just was not, yeah, like not. I think an important thing for me is that there were I never felt that he was being judgmental about me, because I was.
Whoops. Froze up there. Okay, hopefully we'll get Mark back. And I do recommend going to his website. Okay.
Hello?
All right. Yeah, we fell out a little.
The hotel Wi-Fi just went down, so I've just gone onto my phone. So yeah, having a non-judgmental dad was a really important thing for me, because
That's good.
Yeah. So
we call that in the McLuhan world. He kind of preached that. It's called understanding is not having a point of view, or it's suspended judgment.
Yeah,
it's like getting the bigger picture. Now, Mark, the same question outside your immediate family, someone who had an impact on you, and what was that impact?
I mean, there are lots of writers and artists that I could list. In terms of people, like people. Actually, my philosophy teacher, when I was after I left school, what you do in Britain, you finish school and then you do A levels, and then you go to university. So I did ended up doing philosophy A level in the local town with a guy called Pete Ward, who was like really basically a Wittgensteinian sort of school of philosophy. And so I guess like that will have been like around the age 18 to maybe 20.
Yeah.
I encountered philosophy through this guy. And I'd say that really, really had a massive impact on me. Like I really got a lot from it. So yeah, I'm sure. Go on.
Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
No, I mean, they were not religious. So I guess I was raised as an atheist.
Do you pray?
No.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Maybe he could apologize.
I love that. I do get that answer. I love that answer. Dude, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Because these days I would say that I don't know what the structure of the universe is, or do you know that's like I couldn't. I'd have to say I'm agnostic.
Yeah.
But I know for sure that the kind of God that is characterized in Judeo-Christian thought is one that does not exist.
Yeah. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I think in really simple terms, the evil people do exist.
Yeah.
But when you look into the histories of those people, you can see why some of them turned out that way.
Yeah.
So my partner works in forensic psychotherapy with people who you would describe as evil.
Yeah.
And you know, these people are, if there's a definition of evil, then they would fit that definition, you know, without remorse, completely, utterly dangerous.
Yeah.
But you look into their histories and how they got that way, and you know, a lot of the time they've been through incredibly traumatic events, So that doesn't excuse what they do. Do you know what I mean? I think people are responsible for their actions.
Yeah.
But I'd
Well,
say, yeah, like it does make sense to say that evil people exist.
That's the answer I get a lot is everybody's capable of being evil, but there's something that happens, trauma or whatever. But really, Mark, the hidden question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the Mob and the Samurai, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK says, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, Fellini says, I need an enemy. So the basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, answering the second bit first, I think you have to have different strategies for dealing with different kinds of enemies.
Yeah.
And one of them is to disengage.
Yeah.
Because engaging with them can empower them sometimes.
Yeah.
So the Alan Watts one, it might be a good strategy not to engage with that. But yeah, I mean, the word enemy is a bit of a difficult word. Like, let's say people that I have people who I find problematic.
Yeah.
And I think there are different strategies that you have to call upon, depending on the nature of that problem.
But like your son, say your son came home when he was younger and he says, I'm being bullied. What would you say to him?
I'd want to know more. I'd want to know about who the bully was. Do I know the bully's parents? What I'd do a lot. I'd say stay away from the bully. I'd say don't fight back.
Yeah.
I'd say stay safe. Keep talking to me about it.
Yeah.
And I'd deal with it.
Yeah.
Is what I'd do.
But this is, it goes one more step. Nassim Taleb said, games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. So Gregory Bateson, the anthropologist, says, if the criminal gets caught, does he go, whoa, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, I did something morally and socially wrong? So again, it's a lot of prompts. What do we do about this? But the bottom line question is, does punishment work?
No, I don't believe in punishment. I think if someone commits a horrendous crime, they should be they should relinquish the right to live in a free society.
Yeah.
Forever, in some cases, and be held in an institution. And denying someone's freedom, I think, is enough in itself. So yeah, I don't believe in punishment.
Yeah.
I believe in either rehabilitating people, or taking them out of society, but punishment achieves nothing. In my opinion.
James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, we do both, don't we? But the play is a way of reflecting upon life.
Yeah.
And learning about things that we didn't directly experience.
Yeah.
So I think we do both. And yeah.
So Mark, walk us through your tipping point when you said, I want to be being an artist, being an electronic composer. I mean, those are your two main things when you say artist, electronic composer, and it sounds like philosopher too, or philosophy. Where's that tipping point? You know, you're in high school. What are you gravitating towards where you go, that's what I want to do?
Well, I think I was probably around the age of 11 or 12, and I realized that like I was really dissatisfied with the kinds of interactions I was having with my friendship group. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Young guys the same age, and it's like I just began to find them totally boring. So a tipping point for me, or a turning point, was, so I've got an older brother, he's 5 years older than me, and he was also a bit of a dropout. And I think the kind of college lecturers in the local town sort of adopted him a little bit. And I remember one day coming home from school, and there were some new books on the bookshelf that clearly weren't my mum's books. And one of them was the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Wow.
One of them was The Politics of Experience by R.D. Laing.
Jeez.
One of them was the Manifesto of the Communist Party.
Oh my God.
And I read these books and I thought, there are people in the world like me.
That is a good setup, man. Whoever gave your brother, what'd your brother end up doing? What was what's your bro's career?
So he's a nurse working in epilepsy care.
Yeah.
But you know, he would have been a brilliant artist. Like
Yeah.
like there were some protests in our town recently about anti-racism and stuff, and my older brother made this canvas and saying, I think he said something like "no room for racism in our town."
Yeah.
But the quality, you know, the way he'd done the typography and everything, it was just so perfect.
Yeah.
So
Hey, well, better, in my opinion, better that than in some honky art gallery.
yeah.
But
So, yeah,
somehow, yeah, it seems though your mom and dad are bestowed on you guys to make the world a better place is where it's at. That's the value.
Yeah. I mean,
if he's being a nurse, he's dedicating his life. But anyway, so you see these books and you start reading them. So then you're going, okay, there's people like me. Then where did you go? Oh, then did you go, okay, I'll go into philosophy and study that in high school and college? Or did you go study art?
At the same time, I was like interested in electronic music, because there was the synth pop thing was getting really big in Britain, you know, around this time.
Well, at what age are you hearing synth pop affect you?
I'd say around, like, again, 12, 13, maybe like 13, 14 years old.
Who's the two or three groups that made that first impact of music?
So a group actually from Sheffield called the Human League.
Oh, Human League. Okay.
Yeah. And then another group called Soft Cell were quite important to me.
Oh, yeah.
Or back in those days, Depeche Mode.
Yeah.
And I just really gravitated to that kind of music, and the whole kind of world, you know, the whole ecosystem that went with it. You know, because I was a little bit too young to be a punk rocker. You know, punk rock was like 76, 77. I was a bit too young for that. And also it although the punk rock movement originally was quite politically progressive and anti-racist and stuff, my feeling was that quite quickly it got hijacked by a lot of just violent young men.
Yeah.
Who just used it as an excuse to beat people up and spit at each other and stuff.
Yeah.
And so the kind of synth pop movement, we called it new romantic music back then, was the label we used. Felt like a very a reaction against that.
But
You
are
know,
you taking keyboard lessons? Are you taking music lessons?
no,
Are
I
you
never studied music.
you
So
never studied? So how did you go? Okay, these synth pop guys are doing this sound that's a little different than crunchy guitars. You go, oh, I'm going to go into computers and make. Then you went into coding, or where's that? I'm going to
well,
follow. Yeah,
a few things happened at the same time. So my year at school was the first year to do computer science. So I
I see.
studied computer science. So I
Yeah,
had a home computer. It was a Commodore 64 computer.
yeah,
So, you know, I understood. I felt quite at home with this programming sort of paradigm. And
right.
then my parents bought me a mono synth. Actually, my parents' next door neighbor had a mono synth that I borrowed. And then they bought me a drum machine. So like the kind of first real musical stuff that I made was this combination of drum machine and mono synth, which is kind of like I would say is at the heart of my sort of musical cognitive framework.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it was that as well as reading books, finding weird films, you know.
What's
That's what.
the? Did you go to college?
Yeah, so after I left school, you know, when I was at school, I was like the brainy kid. You know,
Yeah, let's see.
I was like the super brainy kid, but I was also like the really antagonistic kid. So I tried to start an anarchist organization while I was at school to kind of to take control of the school. And I think the teachers tolerated me because I was an academic high achiever, basically. So, but you know, I kind of dropped out. I kind of scraped through school with some basic exams. You know, I was a big disappointment to all my teachers, and then went to college to study. Firstly, I studied graphic design. Then I studied.
Oh, you studied graphic design. I see.
Yeah,
So
and
then did
then
you get jobs as a graphic designer?
oh no, there were no jobs. So what happened was, but this time I was an anarchist. I didn't want a job. I wanted to just live, you know, in this in between world of like, just, do you know what I mean? Of
Yeah,
like, in this no man's land of empty buildings and derelict whatever, and you know, that's what and so I studied graphic design, then studied philosophy.
that's what I
Then
thought.
at the
Yeah.
age of 21, I had a son. So my son was born at the age of when I was 21.
Yeah.
And then I went to study experimental film at university.
Oh my God, where'd you study experimental film at?
So in Britain at this time, so I had started in 1989. In Britain, there were two there were the universities and the polytechnics, and the universities were the elite kind of academic institutions,
Yeah.
and the polytechnics were kind of meant for more like technical skills and vocational stuff. But ironically, the polytechnics were all really radical. So if you went to study fine art at a polytechnic, you were
Yeah.
put through this really highly politicized, radicalized
Yeah.
pathway. So I was at a place called Sheffield City Polytechnic, which back in those days was one of the best places in Britain to study experimental film. So I was
Wow.
really lucky to get on that course, and it was an absolutely brilliant course. And
Who's your
it was
main teacher? Who's your main teacher? Do you have a one main teacher?
so there was a guy called Barry Callahan who wrote a book on like experimental film, and Steve Hawley was another. He was a video artist. Fran Hegarty was a performance artist. Sharon Kivland was a kind of writer and theorist. So it was all these kind of. It was just brilliant.
Yeah,
So
because
yeah,
that's funny. That's how I met you somehow, because that's my main thing is experimental film.
all
So
right.
somehow I met you through the experimental film world in reading something, and then realized that, I mean, now, I mean, your main thing is putting on experimental music.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
but really the sort of the methodologies and the kind of ideological frameworks that I'm drawing from in the production of music are really coming from experimental film.
that's
So like
amazing.
I was really influenced by Peter Giddal. You've probably heard of Peter Giddal. So he's
How do
a
you spell that?
British Peter Giddal, like
How
a
do you spell the
material
last? How do you
G
spell the
I
last?
Giddal.
Okay, yeah.
So he's kind of slightly later than structuralist filmmaking, and he wrote a book called The Theory and Practice of Materialist Film, something like that. Anyway, but Peter Giddal was a really big influence to me.
Yeah,
Also, Kabelka, Peter Kabelka, you know, the
there you
Austrian
go.
guy.
Cabela's
And
huge, yeah.
yeah,
And so
and
I know, maybe, have you ever entered the Ann Arbor Film Festival?
no,
Wow.
I haven't.
So anyways, Mark, I asked for 90 minutes. It's already 90 minutes. Can you go longer now?
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's like
Okay.
11:20, it's 11:15 here, and I'm in a hotel room, so I'm aware that
Right.
I don't,
So,
if there's someone just there, they're going to get really angry. But let's keep
so
going.
if we can go another 15 minutes, but
Sure, yeah,
I
yeah.
would love to plan a part 2 down the road so that we can get deeper into music and deeper into film, because I have a whole slew of questions about music, especially your genre. I have my friend is deep into what you do, and I asked him, "Do you have a question?" And Joseph provided me with a really good question, which I'll hold till the end, about your specific electronic music, electronic
Okay.
coding, that kind. But let's
Yeah.
go into this for a second. We'll do these 2 or 3 main ones. A screenwriting teacher told me a great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great film, great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. When you're composing, making a piece of art, sound design, you're designing a composition. I mean, basically, you're a composer. What role does intention play in your creative process? It's not a commission. It's Mark.
Yeah.
It's good. Yeah.
So I think my methodology is to kind of respond to what I encounter as I am making stuff. So if you talk about intention, it might be like, I intend to do this. But for me, that's kind of like a starting point rather than an end point. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the intention is the kind of premise rather than the conclusion.
Yeah.
So having said that, you could also say my intention is to explore what I encounter as I'm
Yeah.
in the process of making work.
Yeah.
I think in terms of like aesthetic outcomes, for me, there are kind of like, there are easy to enjoy aesthetic outcomes, and then there are more complex and ambiguous aesthetic structures. And I think for me, aesthetic ambiguity is the thing that I try to that I try to be mindful of.
Yeah.
But you know, we talked earlier about like what happens when language breaks down. This is the stuff that I really struggle to talk about. Maybe it's just because I'm not good at talking about this stuff, but it feels like every time I try and talk about the way I make work and the role of things like aesthetics and intention and I can never find a satisfactory way of
But
describing it.
but you're not required. See, in the world, what happened is artists had to start explaining themselves. No, this is Stan Brakhage was a good example because he's the catch-all, poster boy for experimental film. Like, you like experimental film? I go, like, yeah, Stan Brakhage. He says, don't talk about your work. Let the work speak for itself. And then he would talk for 2 hours.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing. I like to talk, and I don't ever try to explain the work, but I'm really obsessed by creative process.
Yeah.
It's the thing that's the thing that keeps me up at night, thinking about how to talk about creative process.
But here's the follow-up might open up another door. Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your viewer, your listener, when you're making your art?
I'd say I'm acutely aware of the audience.
Yeah.
And it's not about pandering to their needs, but it's about understanding that I'm making a thing, that the thing I'm making isn't for me. Do you know what I mean? It's not really about me.
Yeah.
It's about what happens when that thing is put into the world.
Yeah. No, you're very smart, because that's the main thing I've always said. Once the artist makes their art, it's no longer theirs. It's the user. They can do whatever they want with it. So I mean, that's it. In your world, Philip Glass was making this kind of Looperama music, as Zappa called it, and then all of a sudden it became mandatory that every documentary has Philip Glass music. Now, was it his fault? No, but do I have a bias against him? Yes. But it's not fair. So
that's very honest of you to admit to that. I mean, I'm not a massive fan of Philip. Certainly his later work kind of just lost.
Yeah, Mark, it's the question I ask people like you: who's better, Steve Reich or Philip Glass?
Yeah, but if in that list you also included Terry Riley, then
that's the answer you get. I go, who's better, Steve Reich or Philip Glass? You go, Terry Riley.
yeah. I mean,
that's evident.
Terry Riley is the one that hits the spot for me.
I've wanted to ask him all these questions for years. We saw him play once live, and it was just on a piano, and it was like him playing Keith Jarrett. It was really cool. But I know what you're saying. I know you know this realm of music. But here's the next one, Mark, because part 2 will get a lot deeper into music. But what McLuhan said was everything we invent extends some humanness. So knife and fork extends our teeth. The shutter in a camera extends our eyelid. And maybe even non-tangible, say philosophy or religion, extends consciousness. Your main tool is, would you say, the computer? Coding.
My main tool is a bit of software called Max MSP that is I don't know if do you know this software.
But you explained it a little in one of your just to keep it on basic terms. What if one of your main tools is software? What humanness does software extend for you?
Well, let's think about that specific software.
Yeah.
It extends my ability to explore algorithmic systems. Is what it does.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, if I wanted to be strictly kind of McLuhanist in my answer, which I'm not sure if I'd want to be, but if I'm going to be, I'd say it extends my ability to deal with time.
Yeah, that's great. Because as your art form more a live performance, or you sold CDs or DVD, or what was your product?
Well, I either do release record. I do lots of different things. You know, I do installations, I do gallery shows. I sometimes
Right.
make, but typically in the music world, I either release records,
Yeah.
or perform.
Or
And
perform.
yeah, and
Yeah.
they're two very different things, because
Yeah.
the way I see them, the core difference is that records are about decisions and performances are about possibilities.
Yeah.
So someone would probably say that like the records are like quite typically a sort of compositional practice, you know, in very, very typical, like very conservative terms of like organizing events on a timeline.
Yeah.
And and then the performances would be categorized as improvisation. But
Yeah.
I don't really like the composition word or the improvisation word.
You don't like those two words. If there was another word you would substitute, what would you substitute?
I just don't need a word. I just describe what I do in detail, and I don't need a general term for it. Do you know what I mean?
But okay, you're at a cocktail party and someone goes, "Hey, Mark, what do you do?" What do you say usually? Just in basic
Well,
terms.
I'm the most boring person to talk to at a cocktail party.
But
I,
they want it. They want to hear you say something. Do you go, "I'm an artist," or "I'm a music maker"?
I'd be like, okay, so I've got a computer and I use this software and I'm really, and about 3 hours later, I stopped talking and the person's walked away. So
But
it's
I mean, when these past the YouTubes, they introduce you as electronic composer and artist. I mean, that's the two. You kind of go along with those two.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if I'm being sensible, then I'd say, yeah, I make music. Do you know what I mean? Or I make videos, or I write stuff or whatever.
Yeah.
But you know, it's really different because I remember the first, because I'm originally I'm from this kind of synth pop, then house and techno background.
Yeah.
And then I remember the first time someone described me as a composer, and I was like, whoa, like that sounds really important. And for a while I was like, yeah, I'm a composer. And it sounded really well. But it's amazing if you introduce yourself, like say I'm meeting,
Yeah.
you know, my daughter was at university, say I'm meeting some of her classmates' parents, and we're all shaking hands in the graduation ceremony. What do? If you say you're a techno DJ, it's very different from saying you're a composer. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm a contemporary. I make contemporary compositions.
Yeah.
It's really different from like, yeah, I make techno music, or I'm a music producer, you know, and I produce music, or I'm a composer. It's like the baggage that goes with each of those is really different.
Yeah. That's one of my main teachers about McLuhan and James Joyce Finnegan's Wake was, Jerry, you never specialized. And that's all. They want you to grow up. What are you going to be when you grow up? A fireman, you know, a techno DJ. They want you to say something specific. And, you know, Duchamp, back to him, he nailed it. He's at the cocktail party and they go, "What do you do?" And he goes, "I'm a breather." I breathe. And I'm like, dude, I breathe too. We have something in common. Let's talk.
That's a good answer, yeah. But
That
yeah,
is because then they mishear it. They mishear it sometimes and they go, "Breeder." No, I'm not a breeder. I'm a breather.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, that's
I also say that I also often describe myself, if I'm in a kind of professional, you know, if I'm in a gallery and I'm meeting people and they obviously know that I'm an artist, and they'll say, "What do you do?" Then I'll often say, "I'm a jack of all trades."
Yeah, that's a good one too. Yeah.
And I kind of like, because in a way I am that, you know what I mean? I do bits of all sorts.
Yeah. And then
Hey, you know
that's
what? I thought of another person who was really important. You know, we were talking about people outside your
yeah.
family who are really important, and this is quite pertinent because he passed away a few days ago, and he was this artist based in New York called Yasunao Tone. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Spell
Yas
the first and last name.
YASO. Hang on, yes. YASUNAOTONE. So
T-O.
he was NE, Tone, Japanese. He
Okay.
was Japanese heritage, lived in New York,
Yeah,
and he
I'll look him
died.
up.
He died a few days ago at the age of 90, and I met him probably 25 years ago. We became really good friends and worked together quite a lot, and I learned a lot from him. And he was famous for doing this CD skipping piece, and he was kind of like one of the. I think there's the claim that he was like the first in the first group to actually do free improvisation, and he was kind of like a founding member of Fluxus, and
Yeah.
yeah, really, really
Well,
brilliant. I
I'll look
enjoyed
him up because I actually noticed him because once a week or every other day, I go to Google News and I put in experimental film. And then I put in
Mhm.
experimental art and I put in experimental music just to see what articles
Yeah.
came up. And his obit came up. And I was like,
Yeah,
whoa.
yeah.
Yeah, I usually I look at the New York Times every day for the obits, and it's amazing how many experimental filmmakers get obits after they die, and half their life that no one cares about them.
Yeah,
But they
yeah,
get these big obits in the New York Times. I was like, thank God. I mean, they're getting
yeah.
some. But go into that
But
skipping piece.
he was a really, you know, he was a very critically acclaimed
Yeah.
artist. You know, he won major awards and had, you know, some big shows and stuff. So
Yeah. No, I'm going to
yeah.
look into it. That's another reason I do this is because I learn about people like how could I have missed that guy or that
Mhm.
person? But the skipping piece, I'm curious because I heard, Christian Marclay. I
Yeah,
heard
yeah.
he was the guy who kind of invented uh prepared turntables, like where you before the rap guys, he was putting stuff on the turntable, like skipping them. Have you ever heard
Well,
that?
we need to do some serious analysis there and actually find out
Yeah,
what that was and when it was. And whatever it is, Christian Marclay's approach to turntable usage is very different from the tradition that we find in hip hop and rap, I
it's
think.
different. Yeah,
So I don't think we could say that in any way Christian Marclay's practice
yeah,
gave rise to hip hop and rap.
yeah.
Their
But
use of turntable.
he was in New York when it was happening. That's the
Yeah,
interesting thing.
yeah, yeah,
But I do, it is grounds for further research.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But this is the question my friend Joseph asked, because let's stay
Okay.
on this software thing, because I love that you said extends your dealing with time. That was beautiful, because it's similar to this. This question is a little wordy, but I felt that he detailed it, and then you can jump off onto it. Please discuss the relationship between music analysis versus music composition in electronic music. Historically, music is composed, then analyzed by others afterwards. Today, when a computer or electronic composition is inscribed and rendered up front, sometimes in very abstract hierarchical ways, there's no analysis, and let's say no or little or less analysis to be done. It's all evident from the program. The analysis comes before the composition. So do you understand the question, and you want me to suss it out more, or what do you think?
I mean, I think So I might be misunderstanding what Joseph is asking, but like what I'm thinking is that imagine a composer writes something, then the function of analysis is to look at the structures that the composers intuitively made or sometimes formalized processes might have resulted in those structures. But the analysis is about the identification of structure. That was not that was probably like oftentimes just intuitively produced rather than methodologically produced. So, for example, I think a friend of mine did some analysis on some Morton Feldman pieces where where he broke it down into blocks of behaviors and stuff, and there's this and this and this. And so I think if you are doing a piece of computer music that is just a formalized algorithm that just you press start and it runs and it produces a piece of music, then you could say that what the analysis is trying to get to is the algorithm, but the algorithm already exists. But I don't think that's always the case, actually, because there's a difference between the musical output of an algorithm and the algorithm. But maybe I'd have to talk to Joseph directly about it to see, because I'm probably misunderstanding.
I could hook you up, because it's like today when a electronic composition is inscribed and rendered up front, there's no analysis to be done. It's evident from the program. The analysis comes before the composition.
But
So
not
it's
all
just,
electronic.
right, but it's not. I'm saying that the word no, there's little or less, or there's some variation on analysis, is I think what he's saying. There's some variation.
It depends on what he means by analysis. Does he mean analysis as in identifying structures in a musical outcome? Do you know what I mean? Or I don't know what analysis means.
Or analysis could mean critical, when a music critic reviews a piece of music. I think he's meaning not the music critic. I think he's meaning analyzing. You're saying it depends on the program, on the algorithm in the program, and the time.
Well, also, it's not like all predefined up front. Like I make I develop algorithmic structures that produce musical patterns.
Yeah.
Then it's not just like it's not all kind of predetermined up front, because the process of then turning that into a piece of music is me interacting with it.
Yeah.
So in many ways, it's like playing an instrument that is built of algorithmic structures.
Yeah. So when I worked for George Carlin, we got a flyer in the mail once, and it said, "I'm trying to get more control over my spontaneity." So it's like, if you have a machine that's creating randomness, then how much can you control the randomness? And is that what you're talking about as structure? Or,
well, first of all, it's not random. It's just complex, and computers can't actually generate randomness. I mean, and just because something's unpredictable, it's not random. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm not working with randomness. I'm working with like quite simple mathematical structures that I manipulate in real time. And I'd say it's less about control and more about a symbiotic relationship with those structures. So yeah, I don't see my job as one of control, basically.
Got it. That's really good. Because have you ever heard Frank Zappa sing clavier music?
I haven't, actually.
Anyway, so the guy made 60 albums in 30 years, and most of them are rock and roll and orchestral and jazz and doo-wop and all kinds of genres. But at the end of his life, he got to sing clavier, And he says, if I had this, I never would have went on the road and lived the rock star lifestyle. It's like, yeah, right. I don't think so. But, you know, he could generate tones from a trumpet that a human couldn't do.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's, you know, it's sort of like Edgar Varese-ish based. That was his hero, was Edgar Varese. But it's with, you know, one of the early, I mean, what do you call this in clavier? Is it early electronic or not?
It was I would say it was like a kind of early-ish digital synthesizer.
Digital synthesizer, yeah.
Yeah. And a kind of workstation. You know, it was an amazing instrument. And yeah, but yeah, it was, you know, I wouldn't say it was at the beginning of digital synthesis.
Yeah.
I think. I mean, I've got to be careful there because, like, you know, there were like John Chowning in the 60s was in the late 60s was doing digital synthesis at Bell Labs on a computer. So what I mean is a kind of a hardware-based standalone unit that looked like a synthesizer. It was one of the first things like that.
Yeah.
But it
the other guy,
yeah.
The other guy I saw in one of your videos was David Rosenboom, or is it Rosenblum? Do you know that guy at Cal
I'm
Arts?
not sure. I know the name.
Okay, I think there's a video where you're talking with Luke Fowler, and you and him are talking. Then they cut to David. Now David's got an interesting background because, you know, it's a generation different from yours, but he was at the Ann Arbor, you know, Ann Arbor Film Festival's over 60 years showing experimental film. It's like the oldest experimental film festival in the world. David was there at the very beginning. Then he got into Cal Arts, and he's taught at Cal Arts for years. And so I saw him at a party there 5-6 years ago, and I've been trying to interview him for years. He's an amazing composer, electronic music, blah, blah, blah. But I said, because I think I was challenging people with when was the first use of pre-recorded taped music in a live performance? Because I was making this funny joke about Britney Spears saying, well, she enhances her live vocal experience with tape. And it's like, so what? She could just say Stockhausen did it in 62.
Yeah, but there's a difference because, like, whereas Stockhausen or Steve Reich, I think, did tape loop work.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of that stuff, or a lot of the French electroacoustic stuff, was not disguising what it was. You know, it was being honest about we're using tape. Whereas Britney Spears disguises the fact that it's like there's a recording underneath it and sells it as like this supposed live thing.
But I understand that. I understand that. But it was more joking, and I was trying to learn the first, like who first used, whether the disguising or not, who first used.
I have no clue, actually.
And well, and I thought my research said Stockhausen 62, and I thought it would be funny if Brittany would go, well, Stockhausen did it in 62. Just a joke. So I asked David who was the first, and he goes, I'm not into first. And I'm like, come on, dude. It doesn't matter. I'm not trying to hold you. You have a vast knowledge. So I thought it was I wish he wouldn't have got off on that kick, but then I did further research, and it is French guys in the 40s were doing it.
Yeah.
So again, it's like, again, I'm into studying patterns and getting a big picture view. Who writes the history books is who wins. If you win, you write the history book. But we know, like, these people that you studied experimental film with, I mean, my big one is who invented rapid montage? You know, my studies say Abel Gance in 1922, pre-Eisenstein, you know. So it's like, no, it's an important technique that is now, it's like, you know, a question I'll ask in part 2 is exactly about that, about rapid montage, you know, because but Mark, it's really been fun. I'm sorry we went off on so many tangents, but I do want to get into music and you as a composer and as a techno DJ.
Well, I'm not a techno DJ, but
I know, but you know what I'm saying. But also
yeah.
as a filmmaker, I mean, did you make films in 16 millimeter or just digital?
Yeah, I studied 16 mil and and like early video. Like I think back in those days we had like U-matic and stuff like that, and
U-matic,
yeah. And
have you ever made films in Pixel Vision, the toy video camera?
No, I haven't.
You know about it?
No, I don't.
So from 87 to 89, a toy company in America made a video camera for kids that recorded on audio cassettes, picture and sound. So my festival's 35 years old. I'm showing Pixel Vision.
Wow.
So it's a real hoot. So, you know, there's many.
Get older one of those.
Oh, you can still. There were basically 400,000 of them were made, and you can still buy them. And now you can hook them up to your cell phone, you know, instead of. So
nice.
But it's really been fun.
I was going to say, let's leave it that because it's nearly midnight here now.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to feel.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really milked it. I got you 30 minutes over, but it's really been.
I'll talk forever.
It's really been enlightening, and I've learned a lot, and I really appreciate your time and energy, Mark. And even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope this never ends and we keep talking forever and ever.
Thanks for the really difficult questions. They're the best kind.
They're the best kind. Thank you so much, Mark.
Okay, speak to you soon, man.
We'll be in touch. Thank you.
Great. See you. Bye.